Hey guys, got another Q&A video for you. Let's get started. First question is, how do I study the Bible? That's a kind of a loaded question. There's a lot of ways in which you can study the Bible. The Bible is a very rich with knowledge text. There's lots of ways that you can get deeper and deeper into it. But for just anybody, I would say the first thing you need to do is find a translation that is readable to you. I would recommend the NLT. I think that's probably the most readable version, at least in my opinion. People might disagree with that. But in regards to translations, I don't think you really can go wrong with English translations. There's dozens of them, but I believe that with all of them, you're going to get the knowledge that you're seeking after, and people get real bent out of shape about translations, and I don't really think that's necessary. Even a good paraphrase is extremely helpful. Any way that you can make the knowledge the most accessible to you, I think, is the best route. You have to remember that people work years and years and in prayer and with other people holding them accountable who understand the languages that the Bible was written in and have a specific purpose for the translation that they're creating. And I think that God is faithful through that. So I think translations are generally good. It's okay to have a preference. I myself use ESV, but that's just because of what I'm used to right now. But I actually recently started reading NLT and enjoy it very much. It's very readable, accessible. And then the next part, I think that for beginners, and what's important in studying the Bible is understand the context. And what I mean by context is what's going on when this is written, the historical background for whatever it is you're reading, what's going on, what is the book of the Bible that you're reading addressing in the history, in the time that it was written. Who are these people? What are they about? Time period is super important. It makes it so that we can understand what these people are saying. Because if we're reading it simply only through our, 2020 American lens, then we're probably going to miss some stuff. And a really good way to do that is to get a study Bible. It's a very helpful tool. In a study Bible, every book of the Bible will have an introduction that's usually like a page or two, sometimes three, and it gives, purpose behind the book, who wrote the book, who they were writing to, maybe what was going on in the rest of the world in that time period, what matters to the book, the characters that are involved, theological purpose, stuff like that. And that is extremely helpful. It makes the Bible a lot more easy to understand, because if you're just going to sit down and be like, okay, I'm going to read this and see how God speaks to me. And I'm not saying he can't do that, but as diligent studiers of the Bible, I think we're called to use the knowledge that we have. And a lot of this knowledge is very accessible. There's stuff on the internet, there's YouTube videos you can watch, study Bibles. When you get a little bit more advanced, commentaries are really helpful. They go even deeper than a study Bible will. But yeah, I think those are... So find a good translation. Understand the context in which these books are being written, who's writing them, what's going on in history, what issues are they addressing specifically. Those are all really good things. And then another important part of Bible study is you have to have habits. You gotta have good habits, reading it every day. If you're just gonna say, okay, I'm gonna study the Bible today, and you're not gonna, that's not habit forming. You gotta have a good system in place that it's gonna hold you accountable to reading this book that we say influences our lives more than anything else. And it's hard to believe that when we don't read it, which I'm not saying that I'm not also guilty of that sometimes, but it's important to have good habits when reading the Bible. Second question and I hate this question personally, but what is the best book of the Bible? So I assume that this person is asking my personal opinion, but like I said, I don't really love this question. I think that's kind of a loaded question. I would say the most popular books of the Bible, and maybe the books of the Bible that people know the best, are probably Psalms and Proverbs. I think that, you know, the wisdom and knowledge in those books has kind of transcended from Christianity into, I guess if you want to call it secularism, the you know, the rest of the normal world outside of Christianity. But if I had to choose my favorite books or book of the Bible, I don't know if I could pick one. I'd probably have to say the Gospel of John. I think if I had to pick one favorite, it would be the Gospel of John. I love the way it's written. It's very simple language. It has its purpose within its pages. It's really easy to understand. It shows shows Jesus as God and the miracles he performs. It's very easy to follow narrative, and I just really like the way that John writes. Also, I would say Romans, just because it's a really good explanation of the gospel. It's Paul writing to the Roman church, you know, addressing the issues of salvation and Jewish law and how it is that we are saved, and that's extremely helpful for anyone. So I don't really like that question, just because, you know, the whole Bible is the whole Bible. I don't know if we can pick and choose. It's kind of like one thing. But if I had to choose, John and Romans. The last question is about a specific verse, about Hebrews 8:7. So I'm going to read it, and then I'll ask the question. Hebrews 8:7 says, "For if that first covenant had been faultless, there would have been no occasion to look for a second." So the question is, how can a perfect God make something that is not perfect, i.e. the old covenant? So what this verse is talking about is that the old covenant, the first covenant as it says in this translation, had been faultless. For if that first covenant had been faultless, there would have been no occasion to look for a second. So what it's saying is, because the first covenant was imperfect, God had to use a second. So this is a good question, but I think the answer is found, you know, like I was talking about context, within the context of this passage. For the next verse says, "For he finds fault with them when he says, 'Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I establish a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah.'" So the answer, I think, lies in the next first part of the verse. For he finds fault with them when he says. So the first covenant was not imperfect because God made it imperfect. The first covenant was imperfect because we are imperfect. So that the responsibility of the first covenant not being sufficient is on us, because we are sinful and unable to uphold our covenant bargain with God, our covenant, our promise that we were going to follow him and no other. Speaking of the Jewish people specifically, but in terms of, you know, all of Christianity, we are unable to follow the law. And the law shows us that we need something else to save us, which points to Jesus Christ. So God didn't create something that was imperfect. We ruined it because we're the worst. All right, guys. Thank you so much for I got a lot of questions this week, so we're going to get to them in coming weeks. I just like to keep these videos short. I know you guys are screen fatigued and content fatigued, so I appreciate you guys watching these videos. It makes me feel really good that you guys are still sending me questions and watching these, so I appreciate it. All right, bye guys.